I, 14M, recently won a scholarship competition that got me $3,500 for school expenses and activities. To give some background, our family isn't exactly poor, but we're not rich either. My dad works as a sales manager at a local company and my mom is a part-time receptionist. We live in a decent neighborhood and generally have what we need, but extras and luxuries often require careful budgeting. Growing up as the older brother to Tommy, 9M, was always challenging. From the moment he could walk and talk, it was clear he had a special interest in anything technical. He would take apart his toys to see how they worked, and by age 6, he was already playing with basic coding games. My parents were thrilled, they saw him as some kind of child prodigy. I, on the other hand, was always more interested in literature and writing. When I was younger, I used to write stories and show them to my parents, hoping they'd be proud. But they never showed the same enthusiasm they had for Tommy's robotics projects. When I won my first writing competition in 5th grade, they barely acknowledged it because Tommy had a science fair the same week. Things got worse as we got older. Tommy's interests became more expensive, he needed special robotics kits, coding courses, and equipment for his projects. Meanwhile, when I asked for creative writing classes or to attend literature workshops, my parents would say they couldn't afford it. They always found money for Tommy's activities though. Last year, I heard about this big scholarship competition. It required submitting essays, giving presentations, and going through multiple rounds of interviews. The prize was $3,500, meant to cover educational expenses throughout the year. I saw it as my chance to finally have something of my own. I worked incredibly hard for it. Every morning, I would wake up an hour early to work on my essays. During lunch breaks, I would sit in the library researching and writing. My English teacher, Mrs. Anderson, was amazingly supportive. She stayed after school many days to help me practice my presentation skills. When I made it to the finals, my parents didn't even come to watch my presentation. They had to take Tommy to a coding workshop that day. But Mrs. Anderson was there, cheering me on. When they announced I had won, I felt on top of the world. Finally, I had achieved something significant on my own. I had big plans for the scholarship money. Our old laptop was falling apart, and I needed a new one for school work and writing. I wanted to join some online creative writing courses and the school newspaper club. There were also some advanced literature programs I had researched that would look great on my college applications. But last week, everything changed. My parents called a family meeting in our living room. They started by talking about this amazing robotics summer camp that Tommy had found. It was a 6-week program with advanced coding classes, robot building workshops, and even competitions at the end. The whole time they were describing it, Tommy was bouncing in his seat with excitement. Then they dropped the bombshell. The camp cost $2,000, and they wanted to use my scholarship money to pay for it. They argued that since the scholarship rules allowed for educational activities, Tommy's camp would qualify. My mom went on about how families should support each other and how this could be a game changer for Tommy's future. I was stunned. This was my scholarship that I worked months to win. It wasn't some family fund they could dip into whenever they wanted. When I said no, my dad got really angry. He started listing all the sacrifices they'd made for my education, like buying me books and paying for school supplies, as if those were optional extras and not basic necessities. Tommy ran to his room crying, saying I was ruining his dreams because I was jealous of his talent. My mom followed him, throwing me a disappointed look. My dad just sat there, shaking his head and muttering about how he thought they had raised me better than this. Since then, the atmosphere at home has been awful. My parents barely speak to me except to make passive-aggressive comments about selfishness and family duty. Tommy has been extra loud about his robotics projects, making sure I hear him talking about all the amazing things he could learn at camp if only his mean brother would share. Yesterday, I overheard my parents in their room discussing ways to get the money for Tommy's camp. They talked about selling some furniture or maybe taking extra shifts at work. I know they're trying to make me feel guilty, and sometimes it works. But then I remember all the times they dismissed my interests and prioritized Tommy's. My best friend Alex says I should stand firm. He's seen how my parents favor Tommy over the years and thinks it's about time I stood up for myself. But some other friends think I'm being too harsh. They say $2,000 isn't that much out of $3,500, and I'd still have money left for my stuff. Even my aunt called me selfish when she heard about it. But she doesn't know about all the writing competitions and workshops I missed because my parents were too busy with Tommy's activities. She doesn't know how it feels to have your achievements constantly overshadowed by your younger sibling. So here I am, wondering if I'm really the selfish one. Should I just give in and let them use the money? Am I being too stubborn? But every time I think about giving up my scholarship money, I feel this knot in my stomach. This was supposed to be my chance to do something for myself, and now they want to take that away too. Update 1. First of all, thank you everyone for your supportive comments on my last post. It really helped me stay strong through what happened next. These past 2 weeks have been really tough, and a lot has happened that I need to share. After reading your comments, I decided to stand firm about my scholarship money. I told my parents clearly that while I felt bad about Tommy's situation, I wouldn't let them use my scholarship for his camp. They weren't happy, but they seemed to accept it, at least that's what I thought until last weekend. I was looking for my calculator to do my math homework, and I remembered leaving it in Dad's home office earlier that week. While searching his desk drawers, I found a folder with some bank statements. I probably shouldn't have looked, but something caught my eye. It was Tommy's name on one of the accounts. What I discovered made me feel sick to my stomach. It turns out my parents had been maintaining a separate college savings account for Tommy since he was 5 years old. They had been regularly putting money into it every month, and over the years it had grown to almost $8,000. But here's the kicker, they never started one for me. I sat there in Dad's office for what felt like hours, reading through all the statements. Every month, without fail, they put aside money for Tommy's future. Even during times when they told me we couldn't afford basic things for my school activities, they were still adding to his fund. When I confronted them about it at dinner that night, their excuses made everything worse. Mom started talking about how Tommy showed exceptional talent in robotics from an early age, and they wanted to make sure he could attend a good engineering school. Dad jumped in saying they always meant to start saving for my college too, but there were always other expenses that came up. I reminded them about all the times I wanted to join writing workshops or attend literature camps, and they said we couldn't afford it. All those times they made me feel guilty for wanting to pursue my interests. They were secretly putting away money for Tommy's future. Mom tried to argue that writing programs weren't as important as technical skills for future careers, which hurt even more. Things got even more complicated when my mom's sister, Aunt Rachel, visited last week. She didn't know about the tension in our house and started chatting about summer plans. That's when she accidentally let slip that my parents had already paid a $500 non-refundable deposit for Tommy's summer camp 3 weeks ago, before they even asked me about using my scholarship money. They had already committed to sending Tommy to the camp, assuming they could pressure or manipulate me into letting them use my scholarship money. When I brought this up, instead of apologizing, they got defensive. Mom started crying about how I was tearing the family apart with my stubbornness. Dad said I was being childish and needed to think about what's best for everyone, not just myself. Tommy has been making things worse by telling everyone at school about the situation, his version of it, anyway. He's been telling his friends that I'm trying to ruin his future because I'm jealous of his talents. Some of their parents are involved in school activities, and now they give me these disapproving looks whenever they see me. Last week, one of them even made a comment about selfish older siblings loud enough for me to hear. After discovering all this, I realized I couldn't trust my parents with my scholarship money. I went to talk to Mrs. Anderson, who had helped me win the scholarship in the first place. She was really understanding and helped me contact the scholarship committee. Together, we arranged for the money to be sent directly to the school instead of my parents. This way, they can only access it with proper documentation of educational expenses. When my parents found out what I'd done, they were furious. Dad said I had betrayed their trust and that I should be ashamed for thinking they would misuse the money. Mom kept saying I was acting like they were criminals instead of parents who only wanted what's best for their children. But after finding those bank statements and learning about the camp deposit, how could I possibly trust them? They're now struggling to figure out how to pay for Tommy's camp since they already put down the deposit. I overheard them talking about taking out a personal loan or maybe borrowing money from relatives. Part of me feels guilty about this, but another part feels like they brought it on themselves by playing favorites all these years and trying to manipulate me. Extended family members have been calling and texting, telling me I'm being difficult and causing unnecessary problems. Aunt Rachel says I should think about Tommy's future and how this opportunity could affect his life. But what about my future? What about all the opportunities I missed because everything always had to be about Tommy? I'm trying to stay focused on school and ignore all the drama at home, but it's hard. The atmosphere is tense, and every conversation feels like walking through a minefield. At least my scholarship money is safe now, and I can use it for what it was meant for, my education. Update 2. Hi everyone. Things have gotten even more complicated since my last update, and I need to share what's been happening. I discovered last week that Tommy had been spreading lies about me at school. Not just small lies, but a whole made-up story about how I cheated to win the scholarship. According to him, I copied someone else's essay from the internet and lied during the interview process. He even told everyone that I had initially promised to share the money with him but went back on my word after winning. I first noticed something was wrong when my math teacher, who usually loves my work, started acting strangely distant. Then in English class, where I'm usually very active in discussions, I noticed some kids snickering whenever I raised my hand. It wasn't until my friend Lisa showed me screenshots from a group chat that I understood what was happening. Tommy had been messaging everyone in his grade and their older siblings in my grade. He shared elaborate stories about catching me copying essays late at night and overhearing me bragging about fooling the scholarship committee. He even created fake text messages that made it look like I had promised to help pay for his camp. What hurt the most was finding out that my parents knew about these lies. When another parent called them about it, they didn't defend me. Instead, they said something vague about how families sometimes have disagreements about money. It was like they were secretly happy that my reputation was being damaged. When I confronted them, my mom just sighed and said, "Well, honey, if you had been more willing to share, none of this would have happened." Dad added that I should understand Tommy's disappointment and not make such a big deal about a few stories. They were basically justifying his lies because I wouldn't give them my scholarship money. I was desperate to clear my name, so I went to Mrs. Anderson again. She was furious when she heard what was happening. She immediately wrote emails to all the teachers explaining that she had personally mentored me through the entire scholarship process. She had copies of all my essay drafts, dated notes from our preparation sessions, and even recordings of our practice interviews. Mrs. Anderson also spoke to the principal about the situation. While they couldn't punish Tommy for spreading rumors outside of school, they did have a serious talk with my parents about the impact of letting him spread lies about me. But even with Mrs. Anderson's support, the damage was already done. Several of my friends stopped talking to me. One girl, Sarah, who I'd been friends with since 6th grade, told me she couldn't be friends with someone who cheats. Even after seeing the proof that I won the scholarship fairly, some people still look at me suspiciously. The only unexpected support came from my cousin Jake, who's staying with us while his parents are overseas. He overheard a conversation between my parents in the kitchen late one night. They were discussing ways to make me more cooperative about the scholarship money. Their ideas included grounding me from activities I enjoy, limiting my internet access for schoolwork, and even threatening to take away my phone, all to pressure me into giving in. Jake was disgusted by their behavior and told me everything. He also started standing up for me at family gatherings when relatives tried to guilt-trip me about the situation. Tommy did end up getting to go to his precious camp after all. My mom's sister, Aunt Rachel, offered to pay for it, probably just to end all the drama. But instead of being grateful, my parents are now complaining that I forced them to accept charity from relatives, making them look bad in front of the family. Yesterday, during dinner, Mom made another comment about how real families support each other and don't need legal arrangements to share money. This was a dig at me for having the scholarship sent directly to school. Dad just sat there nodding in agreement while Tommy smirked at me across the table. I'm starting to realize that this was never really about the money or the camp. It's about control and their constant favoritism toward Tommy. No matter what I do, I'll always be the bad guy in their eyes because I dared to stand up for myself. Jake says I should start documenting everything that happens, just in case things get worse. He thinks my parents might try something else to get access to the scholarship money. I'll update again if anything changes, but right now I'm just trying to keep my head down and focus on school. At least I know my scholarship money is safe. Update 3. Hi everyone, this will be my final update to this whole scholarship situation. A lot has happened, and I think I've finally found a way out. Tommy started his robotics camp 2 weeks ago. Since he left, the house has been quieter, but the tension is still thick enough to cut with a knife. My parents barely look at me during meals, and when they do talk to me, it's usually to make passive-aggressive comments about family loyalty or how some kids think they're too good for their families. The situation at school improved somewhat after Mrs. Anderson's intervention, but I still lost quite a few friends. Even though Tommy's lies were proven false, people still whisper about it sometimes. Just last week, I overheard someone in the cafeteria saying, "Well, there must have been some truth to it, right? Where there's smoke, there's fire." But something interesting happened last week. The scholarship committee sent an email announcing they were featuring my winning essay in their monthly newsletter. They also invited me to be a guest speaker at next year's award ceremony, to inspire future applicants. When my parents saw the email, they still check my phone sometimes, they suddenly changed their tune. Mom started asking about my day again, and Dad offered to drive me to school. I knew exactly what this was about. The newsletter would be sent to all the local schools, and they were worried about looking bad if people knew how they'd treated me. Classic image management from them. Through all this, my cousin Jake has been my biggest support. He helped me see that what I was experiencing wasn't normal family behavior. He also connected me with his mom, my Aunt Sarah, Dad's sister, who lives in the next town over. She's a high school teacher and has a completely different outlook than my parents. After hearing everything that happened, Aunt Sarah offered me a solution. She has a spare room in her house, and she lives in one of the best school districts in the area. She suggested I could come live with her starting next semester. At first, I thought she was joking, but she was serious. She even offered to become my legal guardian if needed. When I brought this up with my parents, they exploded. Mom started crying about how I was trying to abandon the family, and Dad called me ungrateful. Tommy, who had just returned from camp, joined in by saying I was just jealous of his success at the robotics program. But for once, their guilt trips didn't work on me. Aunt Sarah came over yesterday to discuss the arrangements. It was a tense meeting. My parents tried to paint me as a rebellious teen who was making mountains out of molehills. But Aunt Sarah stood firm. She pointed out how their favoritism and manipulation had created the situation, not me. The paperwork is being processed now. I'm moving in with Aunt Sarah next month when the new school semester starts. My parents are furious, but I honestly don't care anymore. I've realized that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away from toxic situations, even if those situations involve family. Tommy's back from camp now, showing off his robots and coding projects. My parents are still fawning over him like he's the next Steve Jobs. That's fine, they can keep their golden child. I'm done competing for their attention or approval. To everyone who supported me through this, thank you. You helped me see that standing up for myself wasn't wrong. Sometimes doing the right thing means making tough choices and dealing with the fallout. But I know I'm making the right decision, both in protecting my scholarship and in choosing to leave. This will be my last update. I'm ready to start fresh and build a better future for myself, even if that means doing it without my parents' support.